Putting sleeves in is something that people find really difficult, and that's why we're going to take it super slow and do the whole variety, all 4 of them, so that you can see how it's done and you don't have to be scared anymore. The first sleeve I want to show you here is a plain set-in sleeve with the facing, and that looks really nice. Of course, every time you make something like this, you always think, could I have done something different? Like, for example, could I have made this distance a little bit smaller? So in the pack, I'm going to make some alterations to what I think would actually be really stunning. But for now, I leave it exactly like it is. I think it's very cute. So let's put that back. This is the actual sleeve we're making. I've inserted some lace into it here, and we top stitched it from the outside. And what's different here is that we literally sewed it on there and then we rolled it to the outside, which of course is different to what you normally do. So you have to be a bit careful there. And then you get this beautiful little sleeve. So let's get started and see how that works. It's actually very simple. The first thing to do is to add the lace to your little bit of facing, and I've already cut off some of my lace here, as you can see, so that I can put it on, and I'm only going to do it foot width. So to the outer edge of what I'm doing, I'm going to put my lace, make sure that's the right side up, like it's the wrong way again, not that anybody's really going to notice, and just put that on here, and then we're going to stitch right in here onto it, and it's just foot width. So pop it under, and then we go from one end to the other. Keep it nice and steady at that foot width distance to the edge. Now I'm just going to press it that the seam allowance goes down. Actually, if I turn it over, maybe it's a little bit easier to see. Right, like that. So the seam allowance actually faces down. I actually prefer to iron it from this side because I can see if I maybe need to move it up a little bit. I can shimmy it with my hand the same way we did on the dress when we didn't get it quite right. You could do that here if it's not quite lining up by ironing it from this side. It's easier to see where you've gone wrong, and if you haven't, then it's beautiful. So you got a really nice result here. Now I'm going to close my seams. The only pin I would put in here is where the lace starts, so it doesn't move. Now lace here, this is very sturdy, so I'm going to cut this back pretty smartish and iron this a little bit apart. With a bit of luck, it'll go over the end of your sleeve ironing board like this. And then we're just going to press that in, and again you want to get rid of all your threads. Next step is to close the sleeve as well. It's very important always to watch out that you have a pair, because your overlocking has an upper side and an underside, and if you put the upper side underneath it when you're overlocking, that will tell you which one is the right and the wrong side. If you ever get confused, that's one of the ways to tell. You are still not sure, the one that's curved more along this area here is the one that is the front. So I'm going to close that little seam now. Always turns itself off, so I have to wait for it to get hot. Now we can put on our facing to the actual sleeve. This is where it's a little bit different to what you normally do, because you do right sides facing, right? This time, turn your little sleeve so that the right side is to the outside. And then you take your facing and you slide that in, so you effectively have the wrong side to the right side, yeah, so that when we roll it to the outside we have the right side on the outside. So I'm putting one pin in here, stick this in, put another pin in here maybe, and here. You don't really need to overpin this. In fact, the one I did back there, I didn't pin it at all. Should pin it though a little bit. Right, back to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew this in. Now, the key to sewing all these things in is that you always sew from the inside. So put your sleeve under, sew all the way around, and when you do it like this, you can move the sleeve round really easily. And again, I did that with foot width seam allowance because it really doesn't need a centimetre. You would just end up cutting it shorter, which is not what you want. And there we go. So now it's on. The next step is to understitch. How do I understitch? Right? We want this to roll towards the outside. Let's just turn it so you can see it. So you got your seam on the inside, and then it will roll up like this. That's gorgeous, right? And then we're going to top stitch it here. To make sure that it doesn't roll up and show any of this, we understitch it. And what that means is that we stitch the seam allowance to the actual sleeve. And once we've done that, it will roll up like that and it'll never pop out. So that's why understitching is so important. So I'll go back under here. You can start anywhere on your sleeve because it sits to the inside. Nobody's going to see it. And then you stitch your seam allowance to the seam. Now comes the big moment. I can roll this to the outside and I can give it a quick press if I want to. You don't even need to do that necessarily because you can see how beautiful that sits. Really nice. So you can give it a quick press, although the one thing that understitching is really good for is the fact that you do not need to necessarily press this at all. Just doing a tiny little bit here. And now I can go back to my sewing machine and I can stitch it all the way around. Pop it under. Stitch at an even distance. Make sure the stitch length is 3.5. We don't want it to be too small. Now we come to the really interesting part, that's putting your little sleeve in. Now a sleeve always has a marking for a sleeve head and for the sleeve head on here. Now with any pattern you do, that might actually vary, so you need to put in your sleeve and see how it falls. A sleeve should never fall towards the back, it should always fall towards the front. The way I put my sleeves in is my little trick. I put it on the actual side that it needs to go on, and then I'm going through the armhole where it needs to go, and then I can just pick that up here, the bodice, and I can put on top of each other the underarm seam. It's always the same actually. And then I go to the top and I put the sleeve head on the sleeve head. The rule number 1 is that at the lower end of your sleeve, it actually goes in fairly flat. So one of the things you want to get into the habit of is having your hands right underneath your sleeve like this. So you're kind of like not doing that, but you're doing this first. You're molding it to the outside first, like this, and then it goes in. And you do that here as well. It's really easy to start pinning that way around, and you want to pin with your sleeve lying on top, like this. And I move round, and I can already see my sleeve head there. It's not going to fit on there. It's in a different place. Whoops. Like that. So I've got a couple of pins up. Now I'm pinning my front first, because in the front you don't need to hold in anything, right? Your holding in needs to start here and it goes round the back, because obviously that's where the movement is. So now I'm going from the other side, and I'm put my sleeve in, do the same thing again. It's this rolling action, and once you've got this down, you'll not find this difficult at all. There we go. Roll it to the outside. And this is not a sleeve that goes in with lots of ease. In fact, I might add some ease to it. I think it really hasn't got enough. I know I always get these like comments from people saying there's so much ease, but actually I don't think there's enough on here. If you find you have too much ease, you find it really difficult to get in, then put a thread 1 centimeter distance off the edge and you pull that a bit, and that will help you. But as you can see here, it's like going in nearly flat with this new pattern, and I feel like I need to add a bit of ease really. Then comes the next important thing for your sleeve. You roll your seam allowance to the outside like this. You put your hand into it and you have a look at how it sits. And it should not fall towards the back or do that. It needs to fall towards the front. And it does do that. And you also need to see how it falls on the side, right? And that's pretty good really. That's first try. Not because I'm really brilliant, which of course I am, but because it's fairly easy to put in. There isn't a lot of ease in it. I think I need to put some ease in. Have I said that already? Very nice. When you're happy with your sleeve, you can sew it in. Pop it under. Make sure that you sew from the inside of the sleeve as per everything else that you possibly could sew. If you have any extra that will try and push, use a pin to hold it in place while you're sewing. That's pretty nice. Not losing any of those pins again. And now I can just quickly check this and then overlock it. Always check that you have got a really smooth sleeve head. That's really nice actually. That came out quite good. I like it. So when you're pleased with it, then you can go and overlock it. Make sure it's nice and flat underneath so that you're not catching anything. And then you go all the way around. The The next step for a perfect sleeve is to iron the seam flat. What you never ever do actually is to iron it from the outside. The only thing you can do is steam it and then smooth it with your hand. What you want to do is iron flat the seam allowance that's on the inside, and that will make your sleeve really sit nicely. Makes it look more professional actually, and a lot of people don't do that. They don't iron it from here, they actually iron it from the outside. They kind of like go, okay, yeah, but you don't do that. We're going to have a quick look now at what that looks like from this side. Very nice. So I'm going to demonstrate what you're allowed to do with a sleeve. Okay, so I've got it up here. What you can do to make sure it stays there, you put lots of steam on it and then you move it over with your hand. You don't want to flatten it too much because that will not look nice. You want it nice and rounded. So some of you might have one of those eggs. That's really good for this. So lots of steam, but none of the iron sitting on it because the iron will make it too flat. Just a little bit with a hand and you get a really beautiful result. As you can see here, it's very nice and flat and absolutely gorgeous. I just need to put the buttons on now and we are done with this beautiful dress.